The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
And welcome to the Divine Truth on Revolution Radio. It's a lovely Sunday evening. And with me today, I have my co-host, Nyssa. Hi, Nyssa. How are you? Hi, Nyssa. Are you there? I think we've lost you again. We also have our guest this evening, Carl James. Are you there?
Hi, how you doing? Great to be on the show. Thank you.
Hi, Carl. I think we may have lost Nyssa again. I'm just going to introduce you. Carl James is an alternative knowledge researcher and author. He is the author of the Truth Seeker's Guide blog website, where he studies numerous diverse subjects such as mind control, 9/11, false flag, terrorism, UFOlogy, secret societies, global agendas, suppressed technology, health, energy, consciousness, and more recently, the occult and esoteric themes and symbolism embedded in the output of mainstream media. He has written 3 alternative research books, Science Fiction and the Hidden Global Agenda, Volumes 1 and 2, and his 2017 book, What Really Happened at the London 2012 Olympics. Carl is also a therapeutic activities organizer for the elderly. He has worked as a musician, a singer, songwriter, and occasional musical producer for over 20 years, and has collaborated on numerous projects, including over 15 years fronting one of the UK's leading tribute bands to the rock legends, The Who, and Carl currently resides in Lichfield, Staffordshire. So welcome to the show, Carl.
Thank you.
I'm not too sure what's happened to Nyssa. We were just talking before we came on air, and now she's gone blank. I'm sure she's probably speaking, but we can't hear her. So I'm just going to hang up on her. and I'll call her back in a minute.
Okay.
But Carl, do you want to give us a little bit more background about yourself, and what's got you to create your blog, The Truth Seeker's Guide, or how did that come about? Oh, this is back.
Oh, thank goodness. So sorry. I was just saying when we were offline that I was so happy when Taj said that he was going to interview you.
Thank you.
Because I'd read The Shining when it was a book, obviously first, which was a Stephen King novel. And then when Kubrick took it on, he completely went off of script and changed certain aspects of it. And I could actually see the parallels between that and the Apollo 11. Hello?
Hello?
I was just asking, give us a bit of background as to how he got into it and how he's. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it, but
Got some interference there, Taj.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of interference on the line, yeah.
Oh, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you now, yeah. I can hear you now. Yeah.
All right, okay.
It's like some interference on the mic or something like that, like it's like sort of static noise type thing, but it's gone now.
All right, okay. Yeah, I mean, if you can just give a bit of background as to how you came about creating your blog and how you got interested in the subjects that we're going to be talking about tonight.
Yeah, I've always had a lifelong interest in aspects of certain things like UFOs and things like that, and the paranormal and that. Long time interest in that, but only sort of really a generic interest. And I think it was probably 9/11 that did it really for me. After that, I started asking a lot more questions about things that were going on in the world, and went away and tried to re-educate myself. As you know, that's always an ongoing process. It never ends. But just sort of wading my way through a lot of the disinformation on 9/11 and sort of, and through that looking into all sorts of other subjects as you wonderfully described in the introduction, the subjects that I've covered on my blog. Well, I think working in the healthcare profession as well, as I have done for over 20 years, certain things were happening in that environment regarding the swine flu vaccination in 2009. And I'd done some research into that, and I made quite a few people that I worked with at the time aware of the adjuvants and squalene and things like that. You know, these very, very dangerous things that are involved, you know, included in these vaccinations and that. And it was a real sort of vindication for me, because out of all the people that I worked with, there was only one who actually ended up going away and having the vaccination for the swine flu at the time, and made them very, very poorly for a couple of months afterwards as well. And I think there was a lot of backlash we were getting from the health authorities, certainly. You know, almost like threatening people that, you know, if you're going to work in the sort of NHS sector sort of thing, then you had to have these vaccinations. You know, even though it wasn't law that you had to, it was worded in such a way. And I think that was my first sort of real sort of activism, for want of a better way of putting it. It's not a word that I like, but it certainly was like that at the time. And I thought to myself, you know, I want to sort of put some of this information that I've gathered out there more widely to other people. So I think it was about 2010, 2011, something like that. I started to just decided to write a blog. And from there onwards, since then, I've, as you know, written books and done talks and radio interviews and that, and just and for me, it really is all about just spreading information, spreading awareness of the kind what the world is really all about, because there's so much that goes on in the world that most people don't know about, and it's very cleverly hidden from people. And you do have to educate yourself. You really do have to sort of go out there and grab the proverbial bull by the horns and sort of unlearn what you've learned in your life and start again from scratch, basically. So yeah,
I would agree with that. I think movies in particular I find them very interesting. I find there's a lot more truth in the movies than there are in, like, even the mainstream, and in a lot of the in the first hour we're going to be talking about Disney. And I always saw Disney as a very sort of very family friendly, sort of orientated, you know, company. Until I listened to your talk at the High Wycombe Paranormal Meetup about a month or so ago, I think it was. And you know, there was a lot of things in that talk which I didn't actually know about Disney. And I was wondering, can you talk a little bit about, like, the history of Disney, like how it started up, and like, I know they did a lot of things during the Second World War. They were involved in a lot of propaganda videos, but even before that, how did it start up? And can you talk a little bit about that?
It's a bit of a difficult one to nail down, really, because we've only got, as regards the very early origins of the Disney company, we've only got sort of official narratives to go on. There are a lot of stories out there, but it's difficult to know how many of them are backed up with evidence. But certainly it seems to appear that the man himself, Walt Disney, was the start of it. You know, he and his brother Roy. I mean, he was born in 1901 in Chicago. By the age of 18, he was a commercial illustrator, and he and his brother basically just upped sticks and moved to Hollywood, set up the Disney Brothers studio, which later became the Walt Disney Company. I think that was 1923 when they got that going. But the successes came quite quickly, actually. They did a load of these short films based on Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and it kind of went from there, really. There were real successes, these short films, and 1928 they created Mickey Mouse, and 1937 they released the first animated feature made in full colour and sound, which was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and then for a couple of years after that they had these real successes, you know, Pinocchio and Fantasia and Dumbo, that sort of thing. But and that really is where it lies with the official narrative of the origins of Disney. But it really sort of changes tack, because already at that point they were promoting themselves very much as, like you say, wholesome family values and catering to the family and children and all that kind of thing. But during the Second World War, that all changed completely. I mean, they went completely into sort of basically the company was co-opted by the US Department of Defense and employed in military propaganda by like sort of late 1941. The US Army and Navy had contracted most of Disney's studio facilities, and they've got the staff creating like training and instruction films for the military and these sort of home front morale boosting short films like De Furious Face was one of them, and Victory Through Air Power is another one I can think of off the top of my head. The whole Disney studio itself was converted into a military post, and they replaced an awful lot of the film equipment with anti-aircraft weaponry, and crates of ammunition and jeeps were brought in, and it actually guarded the nearby Lockheed plant against possible airstrikes as well during the Second World War. The actual Disney studio did, which is bizarre really when you think about it, looking back on the history of Hollywood studios and that. And sort of, I think really during the World War II, probably about 90% of production took the form of training films, propaganda, that sort of thing. And their techniques were so effective that the Nazis actually adopted them to make their own propaganda cartoons as well, which is a bit mad really when you think about it. Go
ahead, sorry. I was going to ask you about Walt Disney himself, because he's quite an interesting character, and him, and how he actually created Walt Disney, and on that side as well.
Yeah, I mean there are, like I say, there are a lot of contradictory stories out there really about. I mean, I've heard all sorts of strange stories about the origins of where Walt Disney came from and all that, but it is difficult to really know how it all happened. I mean, it just seemed as though he was one of these lucky people at a lucky time. Maybe that wasn't the case, but I've never really ever come across anything to contradict that. I've read stories that he was part of an elite family of sorts, but then there's other stories that he was adopted or something like that. So I don't know whether he had a leg up, but that I've never really come across anything to contradict the official narrative. But certainly, if you look, it's difficult, like you say, with those early years, sort of seeing how he really got his foot in the door with Hollywood. But certainly from the Second World War onwards, the establishment types were very much in there, and Disney himself just sort of went along with, seemed to go along with it all. But sorry, got some interference on the line. That's it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So,
Nyssa, sorry, Nyssa, are you still there? I think Nyssa just hung up.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you couldn't hear me. I was just going to say, wasn't he Walt Disney, because he was close friends with Von Braun, and he was brought over through Project Paperclip, but he was the psychological department, whereas Von Braun was the NASA and the space. But the reason that they put him in Disney was to program the minds of the children, because the children become the adults. And the reason you will not find a single Disney movie where the parents do not die at the beginning is because it's trauma bonding to the children. So you have the shock and the trauma of the parents dying, and that gets the interest of full awareness, conscious attention of the children. And then whatever information comes in there, it's like the floodgates are open, and that's why you have these children going around singing Disney songs, wanting to be Little Mermaids. And also you have the hierarchy programming, and also a lot of the programs that he the films, the archetypes that he programmed the children with were also used in mind control programs as well, because he'd come from that sort of background. That's what kind of
I mean, that certainly is the case, and in my research I've documented a huge amount of that what you were just talking about. Absolutely. I wish in a way I could sort of nail down almost as if he was put in that, Walt Disney himself was put in that position in the first place, but certainly he seemed to understand that psychology, everything that you've just described. He certainly seemed to understand that in his animation and his stories and that. And you only have to look at some of these actresses and actors that started out in like the Mickey Mouse Club, like Britney Spears, for example, is one just prominent example, but there's many others. And that sort of almost like they go off the rails, don't they, eventually? And there's a lot of stories out there about whether these celebrities have been programmed. And the narratives, like you say, I'm just looking at my notes here actually now, because it's something I was actually saying, that if you look at how Disney films are sold as being appropriate for like families, especially young children. It couldn't be further from the truth, could it? Really?
Almost, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Dramatic.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
look at Bambi, for goodness sake. You know,
Absolutely, yeah. His mother gets shot, and there's blood there as well in Bambi in the animation. I'm quite fond of saying when I do these talks on this subject, how I know of children who I'm not saying sort of lifelong trauma, but saw these films when they were young, and it really did upset them at the time. You've got like the Pinocchio locking him in a bird cage and telling him if he grows too old, he'll chop him up into firewood, and Alice in Wonderland with the Queen of Hearts ordering the decapitation of Alice, and all this kind of thing. And you have these sort of family archetypes as well, like sort of children that have central characters are orphaned, fostered, abandoned, adopted, or they got no family at all. They suffer the loss of one or both of their parents at a young age. Many of them are adopted or foster and step-parent roles in the films. And as I argue when I talk about these subjects, is that that's not so much the issue, irrespective of what a family unit should be. It's more about whatever these roles are, when they've got their charges, children to look after, they should be nurturing them, they should be caring for them and loving towards them. But Disney regularly portrays those types of characters as being they are psychotic. And they've got these homicidal tendencies, they're trying to actually kill them and all that, and kill these children, It's not really wholesome family values, is it?
No, it's not. What do you think there's some kind of agenda behind it? Behind I guess the mind control programming, that type of thing?
I used to think it was just sort of like social engineering type sort of thing, where the breakup of family units and things like that, and changing the traditional male-female paradigms. We've got the whole sort of what they call the princess programming and the warrior programming for the males that into sort of watching Disney stuff. And I used to think it was that sort of thing. And certainly promoting all of the sort of military-industrial complex establishments like the CIA and the military and the NASA as well, obviously, as you're saying about Werner von Braun, because although those agencies need to be seen in the public eye to be sort of like what they are, which they very rarely are, there's also a lot of programming that goes along there. The amount of times I've read material from Gordon Cooper, the former astronaut, for example, he talked about how running alongside sort of the so-called legitimate programs of NASA were mind control programs as well. Sort of programming behavior in people, things like that. He was approached to sort of pick up work on for one of them. I don't know whether they actually ended up being involved in it or not, but there are numerous cases of these stories going on. So you do have to wonder about the whole programming side of NASA as well, the whole programming of certain scenarios to do with space exploration and things like that. And like the mainstream literature on mind control programming, like say, for example, Kathy O'Brien with Transformation of America and that, and a lot of these accounts talk about how the Disney programming has been part of their personal programming as well. They've talked about scenarios where it's almost like they seem to be going through abductions and things like that, or travel through space and that, and it's a cover for almost like programmed memories for the trauma that they've gone through and things like that as well. So almost like my lab type things,
Yeah. But also I heard in your talk that a lot of the movies, they have collaborations with the military and with certain agencies as well. And some of the movies you wouldn't expect there to be any type of, like they're kids' movies. You know. I mean, you wouldn't expect the CIA or,
No. I mean, I could give you a few examples here. I mean, I cite these. I mean, there are many, many more, and they're easy enough to find on the internet. Just a little cursory research into them will show the official support that these films have had from various agencies. But going back to the 1960s, there's films like there was this Dick Van Dyke film called Lieutenant Robin Crusoe, which the US Navy allowed the producers to film on the USS Kitty Hawk aircraft carrier. That was 1966. Films like Ernest Saves Christmas, you know, 1988, and which is not a film that you would think would be given official DoD support in that film, you know. But things like The Rocketeer, Renaissance Man, I mean, they're more overt because they're more army orientated films. But films like Flubber as well, which is one that really surprises a lot of people, you know. And then, of course, you know, we've got things like the Jerry Bruckheimer films, you know. I mean, he's well known for, you know, we did Top Gun and the Transformers movie franchise and that, and they are really overtly militaristic and have been officially supported by the DoD. But he entered into a contract for between 1993 and 2014 with Disney to distribute films for them. And if you look at his films, again, things like Dangerous Minds, some people might remember that from 1995 with Michelle Pfeiffer. And I think there's one character in it who was wanted to join the army or something like that. But apart from that, you know, but official support from the DoD. Con Air, another Bruckheimer Disney film. Enemy of the State, which also was supported by the CIA as well. Armageddon, which was DoD and NASA. Pearl Harbor, DoD supported. Bad Boys as well. National Treasure. And one of the most bizarre ones is Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides, because it has no US military portrayal in the film at all, and yet they still supported the production of the film.
Right,
you know,
yeah, that's a weird one.
Yeah. And of course, most famous for alternative knowledge researchers will probably know about this one, but is The Rock, the film from 1996, which was a Bruckheimer film, Disney produced, DoD supported, 1996. But was cited in the Chilcot report as what was used by Western intelligence agencies as the basis for the so-called intelligence information about Saddam Hussein's chemical weapons program. Yeah, and made the case for the war. Yeah, you know. So, and I quite often say to people, it's maybe I'm overstating the case, but those reports, the dodgy dossier and all the rest of it, were effectively what brought about the war with Iraq. So you have to factor in the fact that a Disney film played part of a role in bringing about that war, and that's really quite something to say that, you know, that a Disney produced film, albeit a DoD supported one, nevertheless, but you know, films should not be influencing huge wars. You know, they really shouldn't. You know, but there you go.
That's a good point. You also when you spoke at the talk in High Wycombe, you said you had like an insider at Disney. Do you want to talk a little about what kind of information they gave you about Disney?
Yeah, it's very. I mean, I can just briefly read out some of it because it's very difficult to talk about what this lady has been involved with and things like that, because she contacted me very wary at first, but she'd read some articles I'd written on my blog about Disney, and some of the chapters that I'd written in my first edition of Science Fiction and the Hidden Global Agenda, which is 2013, I think, that looked at some of the Disney stuff. And she contacted me, and she said that she felt that my instincts were bang on, really, about Disney. And she started to tell me some things about her personal experiences that working for many, many years at Disney, had quite a prominent position there as well, a substantial position of authority at Disney. And over a couple of months, we built up this level of respect and trust for each other. And as you do with these people that contact you sometimes and say, well, you can never be 100% sure, you know, these people say to you, I'll work for such and that. So I asked her if she could supply me with some evidence of her work credentials, you know, so that I could be certain of who she was and that she was on the level. If she didn't want to, that would be absolutely fine, you know. But I felt like it wasn't an unreasonable thing to ask. And she did. And although people have only got my word to go on it, but, you know, I'm 99.9% sure she is on the level. She is exactly who she says she is. And although I can't really talk about the work that she's been involved with, really, because it would unfortunately almost certainly identify who she is if anybody was listening, you know, that was involved or knew her.
Right.
But she told me her full story, and I did understand completely why. She continues to have reservations about fully whistleblowing on Disney, but she has provided me with quite a bit of information over in the past. And I mean, like when I do talks and when I do these interviews, I have asked her a few questions that I can sort of read out the answer to on air, so that people will get an idea. I mean, I can read some of that if you want me to.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, because I asked her about the subliminal stuff that's embedded in. I mean, that's something we could perhaps get onto in a minute as well, because that ties in with what Nyssa was saying about the child-friendly themes and that. You've got loads of sexual imagery in Disney films and that. And
yeah, I've seen a lot of YouTube videos with word sex in the clouds and other sort of inappropriate images and certain things.
That's right. But I asked her about that, and I asked her about the occult themes that are put in there as well, and the programming themes and all that kind of thing. And I said, is it intentionally done? Is it intentionally put in there? And if it is, then why do they do it? And I can actually read out what she said to me. She said, yeah, they are. She said it's common knowledge in the company. Some are just put in for kicks, but more are dictated from higher up. And then she says, there's actually a cover within a cover. This makes some people laugh when I read this out at talks and that, But she says there's actually a cover within a cover. At some levels, Disney employees know that the company have been tapping the conspiracy folk as a new audience demographic. It's true that there are folks who hate watching Disney films, but they still watch and pore over the material to look for subliminals and hidden stuff. So they become part of the audience by default. It sells more DVDs and theatre tickets, and as a result, the imagery is put in to cater for them. But that's only a very small part of the reason why it's done. She continues, there are high-up suits in the company who have some way-out beliefs, and they want it seen and reflected in their products. There are rituals that go on all the time. People do talk about them. I've never seen one personally, but I know it goes on. There are a lot of people working at Disney who are into the occult, arcane mystery stuff and mythology. It's actually something that they look for when screening new employees to work as Imagineers, writers, directors, CG animators, those sorts of jobs. Ritualistic techniques and themes concentrates and directs the energy to and from the viewer, and the company is obsessed with that. That's what she said. And I mean, going on, I also asked her about this idea of mind control and programming, that's trauma-based mind programming, all that sort of thing in Disney. And again, what Nyssa was saying about the themes in the stuff, because it so often can get muddled up with the really hardcore mind control stuff like the MK Ultra projects and all that kind of thing. But she said the problem with the term mind control is that it was too generic where Disney was concerned, too non-specific. But she says, does Disney engage in psychological programming? Totally. Look at those poor saps who look for work at Disney World and other resorts. The rules and the mantras they're drilled with before they can work there. Total brainwashing. It's not quite so bad at corporate levels of Disney, but there are still plenty of real batshit crazy people on the payroll who buy the whole Disney ethos. Some started out that way, others were conditioned over a period of time. It doesn't work with everybody, though. The sort of mind control you're referring to does get talked about very quietly, but if you get heard talking about it, you're in for a world of hurt. It's like it's bad for the company's image, and I know why. From personal experience, I've learned the hard way that Disney's numero uno reason for existing is to engage in worldview warfare, perception management, psychological control, using all types of methods and technology, even classified or semi-classified at times. They use every means they have to manipulate everybody, building fake realities, taking them apart again, building new ones. On and on it goes. It's more than their corporate marketing strategy. It's a blanket policy that comes from a very high level. Somebody or something outside Disney calls the shots. I used to think it was just government through NGOs, non-government organisations, and military industrial. And even though I could prove that NGOs and the military are part of it, it looks like it comes from a much more external place, the hidden hand, but that part is much harder to prove. So, and I asked her what she believed that the overall agenda and goals of Disney were, and she was a bit cryptic with me at the time, but I kind of understand where she's coming from now, because she said that Disney's basically obsessed with energy and consciousness. That really is what it's all about. So
yeah.
It's
that's
perceptions of
interesting.
reality and all that kind of thing, and even on a technological level, because of things that I've talked to her about as well, the kind of projects that go on at Disney, some of which she's worked on herself. And it is all about that. It's about finding ways in which they can manipulate the very nature of what it is to be a human being, how we perceive our reality, our energetic frequencies, our consciousness, everything. They're obsessed with it. So
that sort of all links up to the mind control, MK
Mhm.
Ultra,
Yeah.
altering your
33rd Club 33.
Yeah.
using mind control, I guess, to alter your consciousness,
Mm, mm.
and I guess manipulating energy as well. I guess
Yeah.
because obviously, did you mention in one of your movies they use psychics?
Yeah.
How did that work? Can you explain that?
I don't know this. I don't know the specifics of it, but it's one of those things that you can either take with a pinch of salt, or I think there might be some truth to it, but it's a difficult one. It was in a book called The Music of Time by Preston Nichols, and what I found interesting, although I mean he talks about being involved with like the Montauk Project and things connected to the Philadelphia experiment and stuff like that, and what talked about the Montauk boys and all that, people who were these programmed. And he actually cited Mark Hamill, who plays Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, as being one of these Montauk boys as well. But it's difficult. I'm sort of on the fence with his particular experiences. It's difficult to know whether he really did go through that or not. But what I found interesting was that he talked about his background as a sound man. That he'd worked with like Phil Spector and with the Wall of Sound, the studios with the all these bands and musicians that they brought in and created this like Wall of Sound, what they called it. And the way he described that in the book, you would really have to have worked in the music industry to know that. And having worked in the music
do you
game,
know something, Carl?
Sorry.
You're talking about Luke Skywalker, the one that played Luke Skywalker.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I know for a fact that he was involved in the music industry.
He was, yes, yeah.
The lady that taught me the flute when I was a child, her son's the lead bass guitarist in The Voice in this country, in England.
Right.
But she also taught him as well. So I know for a fact. And her sons were very involved in the music industry. So yes, that's correct. I know that.
Yeah.
Well done.
But I mean, it's interesting because I had a bit of personal experience with it myself, and in that I remember watching. I was actually in Germany of all places back in the early 1980s, and being a big fan of Star Wars films in my youth. There was a documentary about Return of the Jedi, I think it was. So it would have been about 83, something like that, and he talked about being involved with the music industry, that he was in these bands and that in the 70s, early 70s, and that like what do you call it, like sort of teeny bop music sort of thing, But unfortunately, what's really sad about that is because it was all in German. My granddad could speak German, so he was able to translate a lot of it for me. But I was never able to track down the actual documentary. I know it was like a German channel. I think it was ZDF was one of the German channels. But I was never able to. I really wish that I could get a hold of it, because what's interesting is that he has actually denied ever having, in recent years, certainly in any biography you read about him, he denies that he ever was involved in the music game. So why he doesn't want to talk about that, I don't know. But having read this book about that Preston Nichols written, I think I might know why, because he said that Mark Hamill contacted Preston Nichols because Nichols had worked as a sound man, and that George Lucas needed a sound man on Star Wars in 1977. And Nichols had explained that he'd had all this experience in the field, and apparently, I mean, this is what he actually says from the book. They flew him out on this private jet kind of thing, Preston Nichols, employed him to work on the film, and Nichols said that when he got there, quote actually from him, when they actually filmed Star Wars, I literally saw two psychics or adepts that were concentrating on the camera as it was running. They were putting some sort of psychic overlay on the film. I recognised what they were doing because it was similar to what I had done with musical recordings. I assume that Lucas learned the technique on his own. I believe this is why the Star Wars films achieved unprecedented popularity. But that kind of thing does does go on in the music game. You know, they do overlay things on audio recordings.
Well, backmasking. Yeah, backmasking
Yeah,
is basically you play it backwards. I'm just
Mm.
saying this for listeners, anyone who doesn't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
If you play a song backwards, there's always hidden, well, usually there's hidden messages in the backwards. But your unconscious hears the backwards first before the same as our vision. We see backwards first and our brain turns it round.
That's right, yeah.
Our ears do the same. So we hear the backmasking before we actually hear the real music. And even before that, the actual frequency is the wrong hertz.
Yeah.
We change the hertz of all the music as well, which vibrates our cells to a quite ugly frequency, whereas it's supposed to be quite, the golden ratio is supposed to be like really harmonious. And so it's a complete job. They've done a complete
absolutely. Yeah, it certainly does go on. I mean, I can believe that would be the case, that Preston Nichols, you know, citing that example. And I imagine that goes on a lot in films as well, because for starters, films do have an audio track to it, just like a song does, you know. But you've also got the added level of the visual, which you can embed all kinds of things in it, you know, subliminally that your subconscious would pick up on that. And with light frequencies as well, you know, our DNA is affected by light frequencies, you know, so it affects the way we develop and grow and all kinds of things like that. So even before the level of recognition, it's already affecting us, and something that I've actually looked into a lot as well is these deep down sort of bass frequencies in certain musical overlays on TV programs and films now, and certainly in the music industry as well. And it does affect people. You know, people get like anxiety and stomach pains and things like that. You know, feeling sensations in their sort of lower chakras and whatnot. You know, it's there very much so. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I remember when I was a kid watching horror movies. Like I watched the Day the Earth Stood Still, the old black and white one.
Yeah.
And if I turned the sound off, it wasn't scary at all.
No,
but if I turned the sound on, I was petrified.
Yeah.
So it's completely linked to our limbic system, which is our emotions.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, definitely.
But they know that, and they use that in children's movies all the time. They like to make it really scary and really traumatic, don't they?
Yeah. They always put like dramatic music when something bad's about to happen. And like you said, if you turn the music off or turn the sound off, the movie's not scary at all.
That's
Once you turn the music on, you hear all the music, and that adds another layer to the movie, I guess. But I found
know that our emotions affect our health, so it's more serious just a sound, because we know what it actually does to us because of Dr. Emoto's work and things like that. We know that it's more than just sound.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I find that's the psychic overlay thing. I've never heard of that before until I heard your talk. And that sort of actually explains quite a lot of things about movies. The fact that, you know, they can put some kind of psychic overlay into the film, you know, which would affect you which would affect you subconsciously while you're watching the movie.
I mean, because the way I look at it is, irrespective of whether people believe that psychic phenomenon is real or not, certainly there are abilities that, you know, all human beings have. We had a lot more of them at one time, and we've forgotten how to use them, to a lot of us. And really, all those phenomenons is just ways of, you know, sort of activating certain energy frequencies and things like that, and manipulating them in a positive way, you know, if you're trying to do something. But these clearly are being used in a negative way. So if you concentrate enough on something, you know, it's going to happen, isn't it? You know, it's I totally buy that. I totally buy that there are people who are employed to do that, you know, on that level. Yeah,
I definitely agree with that. I think even the Montauk project is, you know, a story I've looked into in Preston Nichols and that whole thing, and I do believe a lot of what they talked about there did happen. So the fact that he said that, you know, they're putting psychic overlays onto movies, you know, I would find that plausible anyway.
Yeah.
As we've been talking about Star Wars, I wanted to talk to you about J.J. Abrams. Because he's also an interesting character. And the fact that Disney bought the Star Wars franchise, which I found interesting, considering it was basically George Lucas's baby, I guess.
Yeah.
And Star Wars bought over the franchise. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, Disney has always had a fascination with Star Wars. It's been something that they've. I mean, the nuts and bolts of it is 2012 that Disney company brought Lucasfilm, and along with the Star Wars franchise as part of it. And I think the Indiana Jones film franchise was part of it as well, part of that deal. $4.05 billion, I think it was. It was a big deal. But Disney had always wanted the Star Wars franchise right from the get-go. I mean, they tried and failed on numerous occasions with the likes of films like Tron, and the occult-drenched film, The Black Hole, which was brought out not long after. These were planned to be sort of like replicated film franchise that could rival Star Wars, Disney's own version of the Star Wars franchise, but they were so far off the mark from what Star Wars were portraying. But they tried for 30 years and they never, and so it made sense to them that in the end they'd just hold their hands up and say, look, the only way we can do this really is to have Star Wars itself. So what kind of backdoor sort of deals went on, I don't know, but I mean, Lucas said that he always planned to sell it to, as soon as he decided he was going to sell it, he was going to sell it to Disney, which is a bit odd considering what he said a couple of years later about about Disney. But maybe we can come to that in a minute if you want, or I can mention it now if you want to. It's
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, basically, he so I mean, they brought J.J. Abrams in. Surprise, who's had a long bulk of his career has been Disney oriented, at Disney. He got his big break with Disney, J.J. Abrams did. Brought him in as the director of the film, and the film was co-produced by him and Kathleen Kennedy, who was then running Lucasfilm, and another chap called Brian Burke, who'd worked with J.J. Abrams on a number of projects before for Disney, like Lost and things like that. And Abrams co-wrote the story as well. But what's interesting is that George Lucas had given his plans for the storyline for Star Wars, the sequel films, to Disney, and for whatever reason they decided to go their own way with it. And there is talk that Lucas wasn't happy about that. George Lucas wasn't happy about that, which might have been what prompted him saying what he said in this interview. But he December 2015, and he was talking to Charlie Rose on his show regarding his feelings about Disney owning Star Wars, and he said, quoting him here now, he said, "These are my kids, all the Star Wars films. I love them. I created them. I was very intimately involved with them, and obviously to sell them off to I sold them to the white slavers that take these things," and then he starts laughing and he doesn't continue what he says, and then like a week later he puts out this statement saying, "I want to clarify my interview on the Charlie Rose show. I misspoke. I used a very inappropriate analogy, and for that I apologise. I've been working with Disney for 40 years. I chose them as the custodians of the Star Wars." So he's confirming that he chose them. Because of my great respect for the company and Bob Iger's leadership, Disney is doing an incredible job of taking care and expanding the franchise. I rarely go out with such statements to clarify my feelings, but I feel it's important to make it clear that I am thrilled Disney has the franchise and is moving in such exciting directions in film, television and the parks. Most of all, I'm blown away with the record-breaking blockbuster success of the new movie, and I'm very proud of J.J. Abrams and Kathleen Kennedy. So you've got to wonder what's going on there, because people have asked me before what I think he meant by white slavers. I suppose really, unless you get inside his head, you don't know. But it's certainly not a nice thing to say to somebody, is it? I mean, no. It's meant in a derogatory way. It's not like, "Hello, you lovely little white slaver, you." It's they're not gonna. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree with that. What is your impression of J.J. Abrams?
Yeah, not a lot. I think
I can't really remember any of these previous movies previous to Star Wars.
I mean, he started off. I think it was a film called Taking Care of Business, which was his first script, which he sold to Disney, and he stayed then with Disney for many years. I mean, he was one of the writers on Armageddon, which was Disney, NASA, DoD supported. TV shows was how he started out for Disney. He made TV shows like Felicity, Alias, 6 Degrees, Lost. Obviously, Lost was a big thing, you know. And then he went on away from Disney then, and he made shows like Fringe, Person of Interest, which was officially supported by the CIA, and Alias was as well, for that matter. I mean, there was Chase Brandon, who's the entertainment liaison officer for the CIA, helped J.J. Abrams create Alias, and also worked with him on Mission Impossible 3 as well, J.J. Abrams. So, you know, it's really big crossover with the CIA there. They visited the CIA headquarters and had tours and everything and that, and yeah. So, and more recently, there's been things like Revolution, Alcatraz, Roadies, Westworld, the TV series Westworld, films like Super 8, the Cloverfield films, all of the Mission Impossible films from the third film onwards have been his produced by his little company Bad Robot. And of course, he's worked on all of the recent rebooted Star Trek films as well, and now Star Wars. So, you know, and what I find interesting is that when my Disney contact said, you know, if you want to get a good example of how energy and consciousness is a big obsession for Disney, look no further than the output of J.J. Abrams and his cohorts, because it's you know, TV shows like Lost, it's full of it. I mean, I think I don't know if you remember it in the talk, but I demonstrated this, like some clips from Lost. Every other episode, they're talking about sort of electromagnetic phenomenon and how it can cure cancer and things like that. You know, people having these psychic experiences as a result of EM fields and out of body experiences and all kinds of stuff. You know, I mean, that's quite a common theme throughout their output. You know, so him and his fellow writers. You know, these what I call the JJ Brigade. You know? So
yeah. I think a lot of his movies, they address, you know, certain issues like, you know, using technology, psychics, and I mean, I've seen Sense8, and that's a very interesting movie. Westworld, it's got sort of like transhumanism type of thing, where, you know,
very much so,
that type of thing. So he's addressing a lot of the issues that people talk about in his, you know, in his movies and television series. So it's almost like maybe he's got some inside knowledge.
I mean, certainly
what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, the energy aspect. I mean, if you look at like the Revolution TV series, which ran, I think it ran for 2 seasons, and that was about what would happen if all the electricity just conked out overnight and how humanity would manage after that. But that was supported by the United Nations. The production of that series was produced by the in conjunction with the Department of Energy, US Department of Energy, and had some support from the DoD as well in a technical capacity. And then Star Trek Into Darkness, the film as well. I mean, that thanks Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories that created all the nuclear weapons arsenal, amongst other things. I mean, they've been involved in free energy research and the cover-up of it for that matter as well, you know, Lawrence Livermore. They're thanked in the end credits of the film, and the Department of Energy, National Nuclear Security Administration. And although we know that those 2 entities were involved in the film, extensively consulted, but we don't know why they were involved or what they were consulted on, you know. So it's very strange, very strange.
Yeah, definitely very strange. I wanted to talk, we're going to go to break in a few minutes, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about, do you think Walt Disney was like some kind of asset, CIA asset, or that possibly he had a specific agenda in mind when he created Walt Disney, and that maybe, you know, the CIA took over in some way, or what do you think? I mean, looking at, if Walt Disney was to look at, you know, Walt Disney now, if he was to actually look at, you know, his company now, I mean, what do you think he would say?
Oh, I think he would probably say job well done, you know, because we're fortunately in an age now where, to some degree, freedom of information requests, you know, give us a lot of insight into these people. And it is now known that Walt Disney was a CIA and an FBI asset, and that's been confirmed by official documentation. So he was also a member of one of the founding members, actually, of the Anti-Communist Motion Picture Alliance for Preservation of American Ideals, and so he was involved with a lot of these organisations that were basically just steering the way society was moving. A lot of intelligence, spying, that sort of thing, and information gathering. I mean, he was actually, as regard the FBI, he was a paid special correspondent, so that he reported to this FBI agent called E. Conroy. But he was promoted to a special agent in charge, and it actually meant that people reported to him, in the end, Walt Disney. So, and what's interesting as well is because 1993, when the news started to break, it was that early, actually, that long ago, that news started to break about Walt Disney's FBI and CIA connections and that. And there was this law firm, and this chap called William Hedgecock Webster, who was ex-DCI, ex-head of the CIA, worked with the family through this law company, worked with the Disney family to cover up to the public that Walt Disney was an agent for these organisations. They actually went on television and did interviews to spread fabrications that was not connected to them at all. So you have to ask why they were doing that. But if you look at the military, CIA, FBI connections right through the years with Disney, it's apt to say that he would say job well done, because
Yeah, but is this type of thing, is it unique to Disney or other film companies like Warner Brothers and United Artists and others? Do they follow a similar agenda, do you think? Or
I believe so, because I haven't looked into them to the degree that I have with Walt Disney. It is something that I am going to look into at some point along the line, because I am currently just started working on a new book about the nuts and bolts of the way television and Hollywood works. And I'm seeing the same kinds of patterns: military involvement with film, Sony, Comcast, and Fox as well. And
Okay, we're going to go to a commercial break for a few minutes. So if you guys just mute your microphones, we'll be back in a few minutes.
Okay.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
And welcome back to the Divine Truth on Revolution Radio with my guest Carl James. Just before we continue, just have a message from Revolution Radio. Please go to the freedomslips.com website if you would like to make a donation. You can also buy one of our seed packs on the website. All of our seeds contain non-GMO, non-hybrid heirloom seeds. You can also purchase our archive, which is only $5 a month. You can download all of our shows, including mine, and all of the other hosts on Revolution Radio. So please do go to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, go to the support us section and make a donation if you can. And I'll continue with the show now. Carl, are you still there?
I am, yes.
And Nyssa, are you still there? No, we've lost Nyssa again.
Oh.
Yeah, I think Nyssa's having a few problems this evening with her connection,
Right.
so I think she's having to hang up and reconnect all the time.
Right.
Well, the second half of the show, we're going to start talking about Stanley Kubrick, who is also a very interesting character.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm
oh,
back.
Oh,
Yeah.
hi, Nyssa. Yeah, I was just saying we're going to start talking about Stanley Kubrick in the second hour. I know Nyssa has got a lot to say about Stanley Kubrick. But the question that everyone's going to ask, obviously, is about the moon landings. And it's a question that always comes up is was Stanley Kubrick involved in faking the moon landings? And there's a lot of like hidden messages and symbolism in movies like I forgot the name of the movie now.
Shining?
The Shining, that's it,
Yeah.
yeah. But Stanley Kubrick's movies are very interesting, including his very last movie, which he died, I think, just before it was released, Eyes Wide Shut.
Yeah.
And a lot of people think that he died because he made that movie and because of, you know, what is portrayed in that movie. And anyone who's seen it probably knows what I'm talking about. But what I wanted to talk about initially is about the moon landings, really. What is your opinion about, was he involved in faking the moon landings? What is your opinion of that?
Okay. I do believe that the evidence is very, very strong that there was fakery that took place regarding the Apollo missions. So I'll make that position clear first of all. I don't know exactly what was faked, but I'm sure I'm convinced that something was faked. I think the evidence is too strong to not come to that conclusion. Where Stanley Kubrick's concerned, I've kind of got a bit of a odd position on it because it wouldn't surprise me if he was involved. I think he was infinitely capable of doing the kinds of things that people sometimes say about Kubrick. You know, that he helped to fake the actual the sort of lunar surface footage and things like that. But I don't think that the evidence is conclusive. But I do think that the evidence is conclusive that Stanley Kubrick knew about Apollo fakery, NASA fakery. I absolutely do believe that the evidence is very strong of that. I think he absolutely knew that it was going on. So you could take that as either it was evidence that he knew because he was involved, or evidence that he knew because he'd somehow found out from other people. He was very well connected enough to find out. Let's put it, that's even without being involved, that he was in a position to almost certainly be able to find out what kinds of things.
He basically had like full access to NASA.
In the years
before, in the years before the movie was released, he would have had full access to NASA. He would have known what was going on, and it would have given him the opportunity, obviously, to access a lot of NASA's information as far as he was making the movie 2001: Space Odyssey. So if they did approach him, to fake the moon landings for whatever reason, I don't know, you've talked about this as well, and someone else said he was, I don't know what evidence there is, if there is any evidence that he was approached to fake the moon landings.
Sorry? I think again, I think the evidence is a bit hazy. It's not that conclusive that he was approached. I think there's been a lot of theories put out there, but it is interesting that those theories do chime with a lot of circumstantial factors. But I tend to think that there've been a lot of interesting little stories that have come up over the years. I mean, I can give you just
the one I wanted to mention was Eve. Was it Eve Kendall referred to Kubrick's involvement in the moon landings? Was it Eve? I can't remember now. I'm sure you referred to her in one of your videos.
Yeah, are you talking about the Dark Side of the Moon documentary? Yeah, right, I tend to think that is kind of very much disinformation about Kubrick, because what's interesting about that is that the the only people that actually mention Stanley Kubrick by name in that Dark Side of the Moon piece, which was like a mockumentary that had been produced by this chap called William Carroll, and it aired on ARTE, the French-German network, in 2002, and the only people interviewed in it who actually mentioned Stanley Kubrick in relation to the moon landings were these chaps called Maria Vargas and Dimitri Muffley and Eve Kendall and Dave Bowman and Jack Torrance as well. But in the end credits, it's got that they were all characters played by actors. Found all the actors are genuine actors. But the character names were a giveaway anyway, because Dave Bowman is the name of Keir Deleere's character from 2001, and obviously Jack Torrance is Jack Nicholson's character in The Shining. W.A. Konigsberg was another one, which was Woody Allen's original name before he changed his name. Eve Kendall was from, I think it was North by Northwest, the film, a character in that one, possibly. I don't know. Dimitri Muffley is the names of the Russian and American presidents, respectively, in Doctor Strangelove as well, Dimitri and Muffley. So they were fake characters, and yet they were the ones that were saying, "Oh, Stanley Kubrick was involved in faking the moon landings," that kind of thing. So, and they used footage of people like I'm trying to think of some of the names of people that were involved in these really high-profile people like Henry Kissinger and Alexander Haig and Donald Rumsfeld and Richard Helms and Lawrence Eagleburger, but they were talking about somebody saying, "Oh, he was a brilliant man, he was this and he was that," but they never once say Stanley Kubrick. Right. And I went away and did some real heavy-duty research into some of the other documentaries that this William Carroll had produced, and I found another documentary he made called Men of the White House, which is a 3-hour documentary from a year or two before the Dark Side of the Moon piece. And there were interviews with these same people in there, and when I compared the footage between these two documentaries, they were wearing the same clothes in the same rooms with the same hairstyle. You could almost sync it up, So he basically used these political figures talking about other, presumably like presidents and things like that, but these interviews have been used out of context as if to give the impression that they were actually talking about Stanley Kubrick. So it's very much a disinformation piece, that is. But certainly, I mean, make of it what you will. But like, say for example, I came across this interview with Alexei Leonov, that was the former Soviet cosmonaut, for RT News in 2009. And in this interview, he was basically just dissing any suggestion that there was any kind of Apollo fakery went on and all that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden, he starts talking about Stanley Kubrick in this interview. And I've got the quote from it here. He says, "The rumour started when Stanley Kubrick's wife commented on her husband's work. She said it was very difficult to make a film about Americans landing on the moon. Well, it is understandable. There are 2 ships left on Earth. One is at the Smithsonian Museum. It's not allowed to even take pictures there because the displays are extremely valuable. And the second ship, the exact copy, is in Hollywood." So he, and Leonov is referring to Kubrick, so he did some of the shots there, things like landing, opening of the hatch, because otherwise viewers would not get the whole picture. So that's how the rumour about the landing on the moon footage being fake started. And then he says 2 people even went to prison for bearing false witness. And when I heard this, I was just flabbergasted by it, because I'm thinking, well, this is Alexei Leonov basically saying that Kubrick was hired to do some of the initial setup shots for the Apollo stuff. Where is that talked about in the official history of NASA? It's not. So was Alexei Leonov doing a bit of dissembling, and a bit of muddling, but or did he know something that we don't?
Yeah, I think that there's a few theories about the moon landings and the faking of the landings, and some people say, well, the astronauts just went up and orbited the Earth for 7 days, and all of the footage that you see is fake. And other people say, well, they did go to the moon, but a lot of the film they couldn't do a lot of the filming on the moon, or the film was damaged on the way back because of the radiation belt and things like this. And so Stanley Kubrick filmed a lot of the stuff. Some of it was real, on the moon,
Yeah.
and it was interspliced or whatever with footage that Stanley Kubrick filmed in a studio. And there's a lot of anomalies in the pictures with shadows and things like that, which have never really been explained by NASA.
No.
So there are a lot of theories about it. Whether which one is correct, I couldn't say, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly there's anomalies with the gravity in the footage. Some of the later, with the video and things like that. There's that thing itself about the technical capabilities, the capacities of actually. I mean, Werner von Braun himself said, I think it was 1953, he said it would be impossible to send anyone to the moon because of the sheer size of the craft that needed to do the trip. And he's worked out the calculations. He said a spaceship would need to be like 266 times bigger than the Saturn V rocket to do it. That was, I mean, bearing in mind that was 10 years earlier, but there's certainly some anomalies with like the latter missions with like the lunar roving vehicle, with its battery power survival temperature limit, being between like 52 degrees Celsius and 60 degrees Celsius, 125 degrees Fahrenheit and 140. Day temperatures on the moon average around 107 degrees Celsius. That's 224 degrees Fahrenheit. And it rises as high as like 253 degrees Fahrenheit. So, and the rover itself had no cooling systems for the batteries. So, I mean, you have to wonder about things like that.
And then I found out even was it the LEM, the one that landed on the moon? The rocket on that, they couldn't actually test it on Earth because it was a one-time job. It was a one.
That's right.
It was you could only fire it once, so they sent them to the moon without even knowing if they could leave. Which I found completely unbelievable, really.
Yeah.
Well, do you know also? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Okay, it's a relief. No, I was just going to say, at the beginning of the movie The Shining, well, in the actual book that it's taken from, it's supposed to be like a red mini car that goes up the road, which leads into the film. But Kubrick deliberately chose a yellow to represent the sun, and the sun god is Apollo. VW Beetle. Now, the VWs were German cars, were actually created by the Nazis. And now this was actually symbolism representing Saturn V rockets because of Van Braun. So he was basically symbolizing that he was the one that took us up the road the car was like a symbol of like the rocket. I'm not saying that we didn't reach the moon. Personally, I actually think we probably did both, but there was lots of symbolism in The Shining to do with communism, the red door, the red room,
and red rum as well, and
exactly, which is red. Is that the communism? Also, there's one scene where everyone will remember where the boy, I think he was called Jack, the little one? It was Danny and Jack.
Danny was the boy,
Danny was the boy, Danny is on a carpet, which is the hexagram, which from above looks the same as the landing. And when he stands up, he's wearing an Apollo jumper with the Apollo rocket on. And he gets up, and he goes into room 237. Now, that in the book, that room is 217.
Right.
And the reason they changed it to 237 is because the distance from Earth to the moon is actually 237,000 miles away. Yeah. And when he comes out of the room, he can't tell his mother, who is a symbol of Kubrick's wife. His jumper's torn and he's traumatized. Yeah. He can't tell his mother what's happened. He can't communicate
what he's seen.
And later on in the film, when he's on the typewriter, which he actually asked the director that halfway through the film, the typewriter changes color. It turns to grey to represent like moon rock. He's actually typing. It actually says, it doesn't say all work, no play makes Jack a dull boy. It actually says A11 work. Yeah. So it's Apollo 11 again. And there's also lots of like snow, which wasn't in the book, the winter, which to me suggests like the Cold War. And there's a scene as well where he's frozen, and it's like he will always be frozen in time with that event, with the whole thing, with the whole thing, because he's frozen in time. But there's loads of symbolism in that film. You can take it any way you like, I suppose. Yeah.
It's an amazing film, and I tend to think that Kubrick's films are loaded with sort of subliminal themes and messages anyway, and I think intentionally, very much so. I think
And
he
also
was.
twins. There were no twins in the book, but that's the Gemini mission which preceded.
Yeah, the Gemini twins idea, the motif, yeah.
That was completely irrelevant also. And there was supposed to be a maze that was outside the hotel, but in the actual film, the maze was more of the Apollo maze. It was more of a mental hotel was more of the maze. And right at the end, there's a picture of him in black and white, and he's holding in his hand, got like a piece of paper crumpled up in his hand that he's holding, which made me think of the Roswell. Do you remember that picture of when they found the Roswell crash and the man that was sitting with it, and he had a piece of paper hidden in his hand as well? It just made me he used that kind of reference. But it's funny because like the scene when he went into the bathroom and the seduction of the beautiful woman and then turned I really do think Kubrick, all of his films, is screaming out that he was trapped in a gilded cage. He couldn't. The only way he could communicate to the outside world was with these films, and 99% of the population probably didn't understand what he was trying to say. So
because he couldn't actually come out and say it, could he? You know, I mean, and that's the argument with Eyes Wide Shut, is because he went so much further with Eyes Wide Shut, maybe. I mean, I argue that he went quite far with A Clockwork Orange as well, but
very far.
But you know, really, if you're looking at the way these sort of elite types and the kind of things that they get up to, Eyes Wide Shut is so blatant, and it does support the idea that he could well have been bumped off after that, because he really had gone too far.
Yeah. Wasn't there a significant number of days between when that movie was released and when he died? I can't remember it now, but I'm sure there was a significant.
Yeah, I've got it jotted down somewhere, but I can't remember off the top of my head. Yeah, I know that.
Interesting though that say Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, they seem to get away with it. It's very strange. They seem to get away with it, and the directors end up getting in trouble.
Yeah. That's very true. Certainly, I mean, what I find interesting about Nicole Kidman is that just slightly going off the subject for it, but it is certainly related. I've talked about the other themes of child abuse that runs through Kubrick's films. You know, like Lolita, and the seeming abuse of Danny in The Shining, and at one point Jack Torrance is seen reading this Playgirl magazine with this article on the front page of it, like incest while your parents sleep with their children and things like that, you know. But what I found, and I've often cited about the allegations that were made about Arthur C. Clarke of paedophilia and all that, and it turns out that there was some truth to that, because there was this chap who worked for the News of the World and the Sunday Miracle, Graham Johnson, who published this book called Hack, and he basically said in it that the story had been spiked. And he quoted this chap called Roger Insull, and said that because Arthur C. Clarke was a mate of Rupert Murdoch, the editor wasn't having any of it, and despite Roger getting lots of evidence that Clarke was a paedophile, that they wouldn't publish it. But I sound like I'm digressing, but what I'm basically getting back to is that we're talking about people like Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, is that there's this story floating around that Nicole Kidman's father was involved in some similar kinds of things as well. I'm not sure if you're aware of this lady, Fiona Barner, who's talked about sort of satanic abuse rituals and things like that in Australia. And she claimed that one of the people involved with this abuse was Dr. Anthony Kidman, which was Nicole Kidman's father. She filed this complaint to the New South Wales Police Child Abuse and Royal Commission, and she alleged that Dr. Kidman's sexual and physical assaults on her throughout childhood. They did an investigation into it. I'm assuming that, you know, but what's interesting is that very shortly after that, Dr. Kidman died under really strange circumstances on September the 12th of all days, 2014 that was actually, and they couldn't decide whether he'd had a fall or whether he had a heart attack, which made me immediately think of Stanley Kubrick again, with the heart attack thing, So, like you say, it always seems to get pinned on somebody. These people walk around Hollywood almost in impunity, don't they? They kind of seem to get away with it all the time. They're involved. They're chosen to be in these films. Very strange as well with them paired with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, because the rumor is that their marriage effectively ended in the filming of Eyes Wide Shut as well. But
yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah, it's interesting. The movie The Shining. If Stanley Kubrick wasn't involved in faking the moon landings, why did he put so much, Apollo 11 symbolism in that movie?
Yeah.
Maybe he was trying to say something, but
I mean, I found it
for him, because I think that was the point. I think where he actually sold his soul. I mean, I think that's why he chose the symbolism of the axe going through the door, where it said murder it says murder on the door, and then he axes through the door. And to me, that symbolism of if he axes the film, if he axes it, he's going to get murdered.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think
the point that he sold his soul, and then you have the symbolism of the seduction of the woman that turned into the old hag, and he couldn't tell his wife, his mom. He couldn't, it was horrendous. That was when he was trapped. From then onwards, I think.
It's an underlying theme that runs through all of Kubrick's films. Certainly, if you look at like A Clockwork Orange, there's the temptation there of, well, we'll get you out of prison if you consent to be involved in this project. It chimes with what we say about Kubrick, and again with Eyes Wide Shut. He's dissatisfied with his life, with his marriage, and that. And there's this thing that's basically just offered to him on a plate. In this case, it's secrets, secret things, and knowing, these organisations, these groups, and what they get up to, and that temptation as well of the sexual temptation with the prostitute in Eyes Wide Shut, and that as well. It's always that thing of something's been offered to you on a plate. Do you choose to take it or not? But if you take it, then you make yourself a prisoner to it, and that runs through all of Kubrick's films. And if that's the case with, did he take that deal for the moon fakery project? That would certainly would tally with that.
Yeah, I think the timing of the movie, 2001: Space Odyssey, is interesting in a way. You could say, like I think you've said in one of your videos, it was preparing people for the moon landings, so people would have an idea of what space is like and that type of thing. And so when they see the moon landings, it would be more believable. Because they've seen the movie 2001: Space Odyssey.
I mean, certainly. I mean, there may not be many. If there's American listeners, that it might not be probably exclusively an English thing, for this one. But I can't help but think about that old kids program, The Clangers. I mean, if it hadn't have been for Stanley Kubrick preparing the moon, I mean, you could have got away with putting the clangers there. I mean, it is conditioning. You could have done anything. The moon was made of cheese, and people would have believed it, because there's no setup for it, is there? There's nothing to base it. Nothing. Got no frame of reference.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I mean, I have spoken to other guests on the show to talk about the moon landings. I think we spoke with John Lear a while ago about it, about the moon landings. He's pretty convinced that we did go to the moon, I think, but we didn't go the way that we've been shown, and that we probably had help of an alien sort of orientation to get to the moon. But I don't know what you think about that. I think the technology that we had back in 1969, I find it very difficult to believe. I mean, even now, they're finding it very difficult to return to the moon. This is like 50 years later.
Well, they haven't, have they, really? Not certainly not visibly anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it is a difficult one. I mean, I think you can actually, I can't remember which company's doing it. It might be SpaceX or something. You can orbit the moon, but you can't land on it.
That's right,
they're selling tickets or something to orbit the moon or something like that, but they can't actually land on the moon for some reason. And again, now the fascination is with Mars. We can forget about the moon. We've been there, we've done that.
Yeah.
And now everybody wants to go to Mars.
Yeah.
But,
I think that's probably intentionally done, because any trip back to the moon, I'm waggling my fingers around with it in inverted commas on this one when I say this, but any trip to the moon that would happen in the future, if it did happen, would throw up all kinds of problems with people that compare it against what has gone before back in the 60s and 70s, and probably would be able to pick it all apart, and probably would be able to immediately recognise and evidentially prove that it just doesn't add up, that it, that some kind of fakery went on before, certainly in terms of the publicly perceived perception of us going to the moon back then, the footage we saw, the photographs. So I think it makes sense for them to intentionally bypass moon. I don't think we will ever visibly see them go there.
I mean,
they can start afresh with Mars, and again they can do like they did with the moon in the beginning, and do the same thing on the Mars scenario. Again, we've been programmed with the films to what Mars is going to look like. So that's what we'll get when we go there. If we go there.
Yeah, it's a similar thing with Mars. There are landers on Mars. I think there's a couple of landers on Mars that are filming. What Mars looks like, and we have an impression of what Mars looks like. So when people actually go there, we won't be particularly surprised at what we see, because we've already seen it. From the lander, from the video feed and the pictures that are taken by the lander there. It's almost like a preconditioning, I guess. To brainwash people into thinking this is what Mars looks like. And then in 5-10 years time, when we get there, people will say, oh yeah, that's Mars, even though it may be somebody in a studio again, for all we know.
Yeah. And I think for me, the giveaway, if that ever does happen, the giveaway for me will be how we see certainly the colour scheme of Mars, because there's certainly plenty of evidence to show that the colour palettes on these landers have been messed with to make Mars look far more red than it actually is. There's quite a lot of evidence out there showing that, because they have these little target things with 4 colours on each corner on the rovers, and they don't match the colours that they are on the original models as you see them on Earth. So they've tampered with the colour schemes, the colour palettes, so shifted up the contrast and things like that. So if we do go there and we see footage of it and it matches that, then I'll certainly, for me, it will be, well, they've messed with the colours, so what else have they messed with,
Well, ironically, they did that because the original ones came back looking like they were like in Arizona or the desert.
That's right, yeah.
So ironically, they had to change it to convince people they were on a different planet.
Yeah.
But now, so they can't win now. They've ruined it.
No, they've boxed themselves into a corner, haven't they? Yeah.
They have, They can't win now.
Yeah. And I think actually that's the case with the moon stuff as well, because to ever make an open admission, I know people who say to me sometimes, I can see a day coming when they will make the admission that they faked stuff about the moon stuff, the moon missions, the NASA missions. I do feel that they've boxed themselves into a corner there. So you might find that Stanley Kubrick gets well and truly dragged into that then, and muddled up beyond all contention, because you could argue that it's been kind of going that way for a while now, because certainly the recent films that we've had put out, there was that Moonwalkers film with Rupert Grint and Ron Perlman, where they had this scenario where they had a fake Stanley Kubrick, and the CIA chucks a load of money at them to fake the moon landings. And then there was another one called Operation Avalanche from 2016, which won the Sundance Film Festival thing, and that's one of these found footage things with the CIA faking the moon landings again. So, and there's other little strange things as well, like the film Interstellar, where you have these lines of dialogue where the young girl in it at the school is put in detention because she's beating up other children because she doesn't agree with the doctrine, and in that regard they've actually changed the history, and now it's in that version in the film, it was all faked. They've it's like that's conditioning people as well, you know. But I mean, one of the things that I will just say as well, because I like to point this out whenever I do talk about this subject, is that people will argue, oh, the arguments with Stanley Kubrick began during the 1990s and things like that, or it began with The Shining. But what has evidently been proven to me is that we had Bill Casing, who worked for Rocketdyne, and that's it. Yeah,
Okay.
sorry. Yeah, worked for Rocketdyne in the 50s and 60s, which was worked on the Saturn rockets and things like that for NASA, and he wrote the book We Never Went to the Moon, which he published in 1975, I think, or 76. And he basically put the two together in the same sentence in the book. The quote escapes me off the top of my head, but he basically said it would be it would be easy for them to basically just create a soundstage and replicate the kind of thing that Stanley Kubrick did with 2001 on a soundstage and pass it off as the moon. So he was putting that idea out there in the mid 70s, you know, and I know, having researched Bill Casing's work, that he'd been talking about that since probably a year after the Apollo 11 missions, you know, like 1970, something like that. So he'd been doing these like audio recordings, radio interviews, and that, and he'd been mentioning Kubrick then. So it's a long-standing idea. So what did Bill Casing maybe know? You know, maybe he. I mean, what's interesting about Bill Casing as well is that the film Capricorn 1 was actually proposed, as I can gather it, by it was something that Bill Casing had actually presented, and Peter Hyams, who ended up directing the film, basically took it over, and there was this big lawsuit. I'm trying to remember when it was now. Quite a while back, a couple of decades ago. I mean, I can read this quote out here from a book called "The Fastest Pen in the West" by a chap called Albino Galappino, and he's an Italian chap, but he's written this book in Italian, and now he's had it translated into English just very recently. But he said that this idea of the Capricorn 1 was basically put to the studios, and then Peter Hyams and the studio, I think it was Lou Grade, who was helping to produce it, basically stole the idea from him, and Casing took it to court and kind of backed them into a corner again, you know. So this idea with Kubrick it's been around for so long, you know.
Yeah, I found it interesting in one of your talks. You talked about a Bond movie, Diamonds Are Forever. And, in that movie, there's a scene where I think Bond is being chased, and he runs through like a movie set where there's like a fake moon landing. There's astronauts, and there's a LEM. And I found that I've watched that movie so many times. It's never really occurred to me that
it's so out of context, isn't it, with the rest of the film? Yeah.
It's just a weird, because he's in some installation in the middle of a desert somewhere, you know, away from everything. And that's sort of the place where you would think that they would film the moon landings. So it's exactly the type of place where they would film somewhere isolated like that.
Yeah. And I find that interesting in itself, that film as well, because if you look at Howard Hughes, who allowed the producers, he was close friends with Cubby Broccoli, who was responsible for the Bond films, you know, and allowed them to go to Las Vegas and stay at his hotel and film some of the Vegas stuff there for that film, for Diamonds Are Forever. And of course, Howard Hughes was intricately connected with the likes of Richard Nixon, and there's some documentation showing that he was involved with like Bay of Pigs and Watergate and stuff like that as well, you know. But Hughes supported Nixon's early career financially and expressively, and the Hughes Aircraft Company was responsible for building those early probes that were sent to the moon to photograph the landscape, paving the way for the Apollo missions, you know. So it's a bit of a weird synchronicity that is, you know. And I think it's
Yeah.
between 66 and 68 they sent these robotic probes, and of course Hughes Aircraft has been one of the top 10 defence contractors for years, and #1 CIA contractor, you know. So, if you think about it, there's that synchronicity there. If somebody wanted to say, well, why, you know, where did that idea come from? Well, Hughes was possibly one who would know, you know, and if he was good friends with Cubby Broccoli, then maybe that's why that appeared in that film.
Was it Stanley Kubrick who created like the front projection technology that was used in like 2001 Space Odyssey? And a lot of people think that, you know, I've seen videos where they've shown a lot of the moon landing photographs used front projection technology. They can actually mark a line where the real landscape ends and the fake front projection landscape begins.
Yeah. I mean, certainly Kubrick perfected it. I don't think he actually was responsible for creating it, because I have found some examples of some films before that were doing something very, very similar. Right. But he certainly perfected it to the degree that for it to work the way it did on 2001: A Space Odyssey. I mean, you would be hard pushed to find the lines.
Like the opening scene to 2001 with the monkeys or whatever you want to call them. The background, the entire background for that, the horizon is front projection. So that was filmed. That was actually filmed in the studio. It wasn't filmed outside at all.
That's right.
But it looks very real. You know, it looks very realistic.
Yeah.
So it does sort of make you think, you know,
and
maybe.
Maybe
they could have faked a lot of the footage.
Infinitely so, yeah, absolutely. I mean, even with that technology, I imagine that there may well have been something more, even more advanced than that, if you know, if that was how it was done. But certainly that, even doing it that way, would have been, you know, passable. I think it was Jay Widener, actually. I don't know if he was one of the first, but certainly he brought that to a lot of people's attention in his documentary film that he made, Kubrick's Odyssey, and of course, and he compared he drew the lines in on some of the lunar photographs and stuff like that. But of course, and when we're going back to what Nyssa was saying about The Shining and that, I mean, he really pushed that forward in that documentary film Room 237, about all the examples of the stuff that's in The Shining that strengthens that argument that Kubrick, at the very least, knew, if not was involved, you know, because there's just so much of it in The Shining that, you know, just, yeah.
Yeah, another movie we've mentioned a couple of times I want to talk about is Clockwork Orange. Basically the movie is about mind control.
Yeah.
And I want to sort of like understand what Stanley Kubrick's, what was he trying to say? As you know, the mind control, was he like trying to say this is really happening in the real world, or you know, is it more like the, you know, subliminal stuff that he does in these other movies? But in A Clockwork Orange is more sort of in your face, isn't it? Really, the mind control type of thing.
Oh, I'm losing you a little bit. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Yeah. I mean, I've got some really interesting quotes here. Actually, it was because the book was based on Anthony Burgess's the film, sorry, was based on Anthony Burgess's 1962 novella. But there's this. Some people consider him a highly controversial author, but this chap called Roger Lewis, who wrote this biography of Anthony Burgess, called Anthony Burgess. And in the book, he described this meeting between Anthony Burgess and a British secret agent, and that this agent allegedly told the meeting was between this British agent and Roger Lewis, the author, and this agent told Lewis that Anthony Burgess was not totally, I'm quoting now, not totally responsible for writing A Clockwork Orange, and that British secret services were involved with the writing of the book. And he said that this agent had told him that the book was about mind control experimentation conducted by Dr. Ewan Cameron at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal between 1957 and 1963, the remote neural monitoring facility that operated out of Fort George Meade, the CIA were funding controversial research programs into electronic brain stimulation. Blah blah blah. I mean, you probably know all of that, but basically that's what he was saying, that they were putting that stuff in the book. I mean, people would ask the question, why were they being so blatant about it? But then there's this article by Paul Gallagher called Anthony Burgess and the Top Secret Code in A Clockwork Orange, and he said that Anthony Burgess had been a low-grade collector of intelligence data or a ground observer in the Far East for the British intelligence agencies. On return to England, he found himself in a world of spy scandals, Burgess, Philby and McLean, and double agent Stuart Blake, where the American cousins were questioning their bond with the Brits. A plan was hatched where Burgess would essentially front a novel that would lift the corner of the carpet and put into his novel classified material about the newfangled conditioning experiments and aversion therapies being devised to reform criminals, experiments which had wider implications for the concept of social engineering. So, I mean, it certainly makes you think.
Were any
Also,
Yeah.
Taj, do you remember William of Orange? Do you remember when Kathy Morgan did her research on mind control in England, and it all went back to William of Orange?
Yeah.
That makes me think of Clockwork. I mean, the reason he chose Clockwork Orange as a title, in my opinion, is because the orange is organic and Clockwork's not organic. So it was like making organic people into like robots. But it just made me think that her research all led back to the bloodline of William of Orange.
Oh, right.
And it's interesting you should say that, actually, because these bloodlines intricately involved. I think Kathy Morgan has said about this. Intricately involved with intelligence agencies and usually intelligence assets as well. The offspring of some of these families. And if that, it seems to be the case that Anthony Burgess was dipping in and out of that sort of scene, that community. So that would synchronise as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Were any agencies like credited in that movie in Clockwork Orange? I can't remember if any of the like CIA or the military industrial complex were credited in that movie.
Not as I'm aware of. No, there's certainly not anything in the end credits of the film. I don't think any of them are mentioned by name in the actual film either. But I do find it interesting that they talk about this Ludovico technique, which is used in the film. The actual process that they use on Alex's character. The Alex character in the film.
Yeah.
Because I've read quite a bit of quite astounding, actually, mind control literature, and allegedly it was one of the projects under MK Ultra was given the subheading as Ludovico technique. But of course, so much of the MK Ultra documentation got destroyed. Allegedly destroyed. So we've never been able to get that confirmation through that documentation. But I've heard that mentioned quite a few times, that Ludovico technique was an actual name for a type of trauma-based programming conditioning that was carried out. So,
yeah. Well, supposedly the MK Ultra program ended in the 60s. Supposedly. I remember. Was it Clinton who? I think something came out in the 90s, and Clinton had to make a statement. He had to make a statement to say that this program did exist, it did happen, but it ended in the 60s or whenever.
Of course it did.
There's obviously loads of programs under the umbrella of MK Ultra. Even such things as Monarch programming and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It all comes under the umbrella of MK Ultra. So it would have just gone off into other different programs, which are probably still running today, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, certainly they're known for changing the names of these projects like on a whim, every couple of days, sometimes. And I think there was something like, was it 149 sub-projects of under MK Ultra? It was just an umbrella.
Yeah, I saw some of the documentation that was released. The documentation that was available at that time. That was released, showing the costs and the costs of certain programs and the funding that was behind it. That was given back in the 60s to basically experiment on people.
Yeah.
To experiment on the public, as it were, without them knowing it. It was and again, like Kathy Morgan's talked about this, where they used to experiment using LSD and other psychotropic, drugs and things like that on military personnel and on the public as well. That's the
What I find quite fascinating as well is even the psychic projects that were going on as well. You know, the psychic spying and things like that. There was experimentation with drugs and techniques and that on some of these adepts. You know, some of these people who had allegedly seemingly had these abilities, and then years later, it turned out that all the funding for that came from the CIA as well. You know.
That sort of leads into like the Montauk project again.
Yeah.
Because that was basically a project using or enhancing people's psychic abilities. And they talk about the Montauk chair. Nobody really knows where the Montauk chair came from, but I believe it came from a spacecraft of some description. And you know, some of these spacecraft, they use telepathic or psychic abilities to control the craft.
I have read that. Yeah.
This chair basically enhances or increases your psychic abilities to literally, if you want to believe the Montauk story, manifest anything you want. And I believe they even manifested a monster of some description, which led to the end of the Montauk project, if you want to believe the stories that surround like what Preston Nichols has obviously described in his interview, which I've seen, and even Duncan Cameron, who was part of it, I believe.
Right,
has talked about that.
As well.
Sorry?
The movie Forbidden Planet, that had that theme, didn't it?
With the creature from the Id, yeah.
They manifested it from the
psychic.
Id.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and even was Albiek? I can't pronounce his name. Albiek, I think it was. Said that he somehow he travelled into the future. But
Blelik,
Blelik, that's it.
In the world, yeah,
he was he lived for like 2 years or something in the future.
Yeah.
Then he came back and he described, you know, a future which was very different, and it was all controlled by some kind of central computer system, and they were given commands and they had to live and obey whatever. Otherwise, if you broke the law or something, you were put in front of this computer and it decided what to do with you, kind of thing. It was, well, it's an interesting future anyway. And we're going to finish in a few minutes, but the last movie I want to touch on is Doctor Strangelove.
Right.
And I haven't watched it for a long time, but it's basically about the possibility of a nuclear war, I guess, between the Russians and the Americans. So this is what I call fear porn, which has always been out there. There's always, the Russians are the enemies of America and all this kind of thing. Where I believe, you know, most likely that they work together on a lot of things, especially on this, you know, space exploration side. Anyway,
absolutely, yes.
I think they collaborate on a lot of things rather than fighting each other.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. Yeah.
What do you think Kubrick's idea was behind that particular movie?
Well, I find it interesting that he, in comparison to all other films that have been made in that tone with that theme as a story, that he just portrayed everybody as just total buffoons, you know, totally inept. And allegedly I would say not allegedly, because there are photographs that it was shot, but they never used it. But the whole scenes in that giant war room were just descended into a custard pie fight at the end of the film. They actually filmed it, but for whatever reason it never got used in the film. There was just like custard pies everywhere. They were just like throwing them at each other. And there are photographs that exist that you can actually see them as they were filming it. But I don't know I can't remember now what the reasons were for them not including it. But that shows that he was, you know, basically saying it's all just a joke. You know, don't take it. You know, the level of seriousness that the people want to imbue in it. You know, you don't need to. It's not at all the way you might think it would be. You know, and of course there's so many. Sorry,
there was no like military collaboration in that movie, was there?
No.
I think as one of your videos, they said they didn't know what the inside of a B-52 bomber looked like, so they had to create it. Yeah. And they did it so accurately that the military got really worried about it.
Yes, they did. Yeah, they actually pulled them in for questioning and that, and said, you know, how is it that you've got access to such classified information? They hadn't, you know, they hadn't.
Yeah, they basically recreated it from photographs.
Yeah.
That they had found, but they did it so accurately. Even the black box that was inside there,
Mm.
the codes and things that they used for the B-52 bombers was all there in the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very interesting movie as well.
Yeah. What I find quite fascinating about that film is that it had a planned release date of November the 22nd, 1963, the day that JFK was assassinated.
Right, I didn't know that.
But more so because the film was actually then pushed back. The release date was pushed back to January 1964, and there's a line in it from Slim Pickens where he says a guy could have a pretty good time in Dallas, and they redubbed it to Vegas. A guy could have a pretty good time in Vegas. Yeah, bit of a strange one that.
We're going to finish any minute now.
Okay.
If people want to find information on you, where do they go to find out more information on you?
My blog is thetruthseekersguide.blogspot.com or .co.uk works as well. I have a Facebook page now as well, which I'll be linking up to shortly on my blog. I have a YouTube channel. There's plenty of videos on there to look at. There's also my books, Science Fiction and the Hidden Global Agenda, volumes 1 and 2. Available now from Lulu Publishing, but they can get them through my blog as well. So those are my main sources of for my research and writing and things like that. So yeah.
Right, and Carl will also be speaking at my AwakeCon.
I will, yes. Looking forward to it.
And I'm looking forward to the AwakeCon conference. We have some great speakers there. If you do want to buy tickets, anyone who's listening, you can just go to awakecon.com. That's being held in the UK, so for our US listeners, if you do want to fly over just for the conference, you can. But for our UK listeners, you can just go to awakecon.com, where there's a full list of all the speakers and bios and links to the websites, including Carl James. The Truth Seeker's Guide is also on there as well. Nyssa, you still there? I think we lost Nyssa again. Yes, we have. I think Nyssa hasn't had a good evening, but I can hear the music coming in and out of the show.
Thank you to you both. Thank you to Nyssa as well, and you to Tash. It's been great. Really enjoyed it.
Okay, thanks, and good evening, everyone.